everyone, welcome back to the Miraculous Mamas podcast. I'm your host, Elizabeth Joy, and we believe in empowering women through storytelling and education. If you missed out on last week's episode, go listen to it. Jen Fulweiler's on, and she is a stand-up comedian, but like our conversation turned so much more than just like what she's doing in her career. We got really into community and why it's so important as a mom to build that, and just how anthropologically we're not meant to do this alone. And I just absolutely loved my conversation with her. And I would love for you to go listen to it, because it's so easy to feel like as moms, we're meant to be all things to all people and fulfilling all these different roles. And she just touches on that and how that's not realistic, and how to find a village and build a community. And it was just so good and really made me be like, okay, so trying to do some work from home and model certain things for my kids and cook and clean and, you know, have some time for myself, do something that I'm passionate about. Like, we're not meant to do every single role and do all of that, especially on our own, and how it's okay to ask for help and how it's important to build a community. So I would highly recommend going back and listening to it. And today we are going to talk about how to talk about sex with your kids, and not just sex, but just breaking down the taboos and giving parents and kids body positive education, which is super important. I know I've talked on here before, especially in if we've talked about sex on past episodes, that I didn't really receive like any sort of sex education, but not only like not sex education, but not even body education. Like, I did not know where certain parts of my body were until I was older, or even like the certain names. And we go over that in this episode, and how like it's not weird. Actually, it's really good to call body parts by their names, and how kids go through different phases of exploring their bodies and like what feels good, and how there's certain things that are just natural and normal, and how can easily turn into like shaming if it's not talked about appropriately. And I grew up feeling very ashamed of my body. Just not from anything that my parents really told me. It was more like just education I received through our church, and maybe even like older people. So it's super important to me to like talk about the appropriate body parts with our kids, and to make sure that they don't feel ashamed of their bodies as they're changing and growing and developing and learning. So I really enjoy my conversation with Ariel today. And she'll tell you a little bit about herself and what she's doing. So yeah, if you are uncomfortable with some of those things, maybe, or you don't want your kids to hear body part words, maybe this isn't an episode to listen to in front of them. But I still really encourage you to find the time to listen to it on your own. So yeah, we will dive into the interview. Before we do that, make sure that you're following the podcast, that you leave us a review, that you are sharing it. Follow us on Instagram, and reach out to me and let me know what other topics that you want to have on. All right, let's talk to Ariel.
All right, everyone. I have on today Ariel St. White, and she is the founder of the sex ed platform, My Little Yoni, and she's passionate about breaking down taboos and giving parents and kids quality body positive education. And she has books out there, OBGYN approved books, and she's been featured in Entrepreneur, and she's just out there really spreading the message that the sex conversations don't have to be scary and that our body parts are normal. So I'm super excited to have this conversation with her today. So thank you so much, Ariel, for coming on.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I'd love for you to talk about how you ended up getting into this work. I doubt, like, as a kid, you were like, I'm going to be a sex educator when I'm older.
That's true. I did not see this coming, but what was unique about my childhood is my mom was a survivor of sexual violence, and her method of wanting to protect me was to, give me a lot of information. Some of it was way too much information for being a kid, but it did set me up for just being aware of, Houston, we have a problem here. Like things are not as they should be. And so while I didn't know my work would wind up being related to sexuality, I do think that I had just more awareness than my peers. And on one hand, that did also give me just more boundaries and body autonomy. I was very adamant on my body's mine and my initial experiences being on my terms, which I think is a positive from all of that. But my work started out more in the healing arts. So body, mind, psychology, somatic healing work, did a lot of training at the Esalen Institute. And in those worlds, I kind of expected there to be more sex positivity or integrated sexuality. Like I expected if you're in a world where everyone's focused on healing, then isn't sex just part of that? And I found, no, not really. It's still taboo or not really addressed. So my early work focused on women, helping them reclaim pleasure, helping them just get the re-education, I'll say, that they never got as kids. And then from there, just as I went deeper down the rabbit hole, I realized, wow, wouldn't it be great if I could just support parents educating the next generation directly? So hopefully we don't have to grow up and maybe or maybe not rediscover healthy sexuality for ourselves. So that was kind of the inception of My Little Yoni. And I'll also describe this for the listeners because it's kind of visual. My Little Yoni is actually a superhero, a vulva superhero. And that was important for me too, to get my identity out from the subject and to create this friendly, approachable superhero that can talk to anyone and can also make it more approachable for families, because I know that it can be very confronting for parents to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a 1-year-old, so I haven't had these conversations with her yet. But I know it was kind of something that wasn't talked about in my childhood. And I think that a lot of listeners can relate to that side of it, of that you just don't really talk about that. Like I knew nothing about my anatomy. I knew, saying the word vagina was, you didn't really say it. It's like my pee-pee or my, what, just different words. And that those parts are covered up, and kind of just growing up with the knowledge of don't have sex till you're married and then have as much sex as you want. So, so there wasn't really conversations around that. I also lived in a state where sex ed was not required. So I didn't have that either. I never went to that class that showed you the pictures of the STDs and the different things. But I know that that's something that you talk about too, is just kind of the state of the sex ed in the United States, and kind of how we can take control of it as parents.
100%. Yeah. So you touch on a lot there, but one of the things is, most states don't require sex education. I think it's 29 states require sex education, but only 23 states require it to be medically accurate. So, what's happening? It basically means states can say and make up whatever they want. And I think it's interesting to just know a little bit about the original formation of sex education. So it's a complete offshoot of Victorianism. There was a psychologist named Stanley Hall, circa beginning of the 1900s. So I think it was circa 1907, that range. And he actually published all this propaganda, and it spread like wildfire through the medical community and really shaped discourse when it came to bodies, when it came to adolescence, when it came to this idea of needing sex education. And he he said that masturbation would be the downfall of industrialized productive society. So he thought it was a huge threat. And so just to get inside the mind of the guy who invented sex education, and then to fast forward to 2022, and there hasn't actually been massive reform. So that origin story is still what's shaping the sex ed that is happening in most schools. And you can see it also in terms of where the federal government spends its dollars. So billions of dollars since the 80s on abstinence only education, which doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work.
Which has been proven not to work, right?
Totally. And that's why teen pregnancy rates are off the charts in the US, whereas you look at other developed countries that have better sex ed, and that's not the case. And some states are getting it right. Washington is probably the most progressive state in the country, requiring comprehensive, accurate sex ed. So that's great. But our perspective at My Little Yoni is, okay, while of course reform needs to happen at the state level, ideally at the federal government level, sex ed should be funded nationwide. There hasn't been much movement there. And so we might be waiting a while. So what about instead let parents know what's actually going on? Because a lot of it is, it's easy to assume that school's just going to handle it or just not to think about it, right? And so once parents start hearing some of the stats, it's pretty easy to make the switch and say, oh my, I want tools. I want to figure out how to provide my kids with something better. So that's where we step in with My Little Yoni.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take a break from this episode to talk about when was the last time that you were having so much fun that you actually lost track of time. Because when you're a kid, the right activity can help you find a completely new world to lose yourself in and help your kid find fun with Little Passports. Little Passports is so cool. It offers globally inspired award-winning kits designed for curious kids to fuel their little inner explorer. And each month they will send you a kit packed with play-based activities, interactive crafts, puzzles, games, and stories to help kids have fun while they learn about the world around them. If you've followed me for quite some time, you know that I love to travel and explore the world. So this is the perfect thing to start introducing my kids to in a couple years when they're old enough to start learning about the world around them, because I think it's so important to learn about other countries, about their cultures and geography and all of that. I'm super huge on. And you can choose from month to month, 6-month or 12-month subscriptions, whatever is right for you. And so I wanted to try it out. So we had ordered one for our nephew, and then my niece was just in town, and we put together a kit with her. And it was just so cool to be able to, first of all, see her lose track of time in the activities, something to keep her occupied. She's 5, and she just loved putting things together and then learning, like actually engaging in it and taking away like some of that information. Like, it is such an amazing idea. And right now, for the listeners of the show, Little Passports is offering new customers 20% off when you go to littlepassports.com/mamas. That's 20% off when you go to littlepassports.com/mamas. littlepassports.com/mamas.
A lot of parents are probably like, hey, abstinence education might be great because we don't want our kids like having sex or whatever, or even like just feeling like, well, these conversations are uncomfortable. But when you have these conversations and maybe like you grew up in a home where like it wasn't talked about, so it's like seems kind of like a sensitive subject. Like, what are ways that can be made easier to talk about, and like what are the benefits of having these conversations in helping kids develop healthy sexuality? Because I even know, like, for me, like, it's important for me, like, with my daughter, like, using the real words, like, real terms and things like that for body parts. And there's been research that has shown, like, that helps kids, even in like unfortunate incidents, because they can identify their body parts, they know what they're called. And since it wasn't really a conversation in my home, I honestly, like, I didn't know how to stand up for myself sexually. Like, I didn't know how to really say no after a certain point, of being like, oh, okay, we can kiss, but that's it. Like, just because I didn't like have really that education. So, how can we make like these sensitive subjects easier to talk about, and how does that help develop healthy sexuality?
Yeah. So much shared in that question and share. So I want to unpack it just a little. The first thing of, some parents might think abstinence education is great because we don't want our kids having sex. So unpacking that, one common concern of parents is, hey, if I introduce this subject matter, it'll make kids curious. It will, spur them to engage earlier. That's actually not true. So we have the research, it's in, so you can, you can rest assured that actually when kids have early comprehensive sex education, all it does is empower them, as you're describing, and they're actually less likely to engage younger. So it's where it's a mystery, a taboo, where they're left in the dark. That's generally where kids engage earlier. So, because another big part of comprehensive sex education, it's not all about engaging with others. It's, like you said, getting to know your own anatomy, getting to know your own body, developing a voice, just, having the words, the self-knowledge, and that automatically means better, more empowered decisions are going to happen later on. Another thing you touched on, which there's a book I recommend, really for everyone, but especially for girl parents. It's called Girls and Sex by Peggy Ornstein, and she gets deeper into what you're touching on in terms of the language piece. And there's this phenomena that with even with more open-minded parents, and it's an unconscious thing that happens, but with boys, when they're going over anatomy, they'll say, here's your nose, here's your chest, here's your belly button, here's your penis, here are your knees. And with girls, they'll say, here's your nose, here's your chest, here's your belly button, here are your knees. So it's just, I think it's interesting just to think about the extra taboo nature of the vulva, and how even parents who, are more open and would say, hey, of course we want our daughters empowered in their bodies. There's this unconscious bias of just skipping over female anatomy. And kind of to your point, if we don't know how to even name it, how can we speak about it? How do we expect girls to advocate for themselves in situations when they're older? And that's not the whole picture, but it's a very important piece of it. And in terms of making the conversation easier, one thing is reframing it as, I think a lot of parents have this idea of it's the talk. It's like this one huge sit down, right, heavy duty, get into all of it. And it's like, wow. I mean, that's just, it's way too vast of a subject matter. The terrain is always changing. I mean, in my 30s, my sexuality continues to change and evolve. Like, it's this never ending development, really. And so to put the pressure on yourself to think that as a parent, you need to get through all of it in one conversation, that's just not, I invite parents to take that pressure off and to reframe it more in terms of it's a series of ongoing conversations that ideally starts as early as possible. And it starts with anatomy. So it doesn't start with talking about partner sex or anything like that. And right, like what you were saying in terms of accurate anatomy, that's really the beginning, the foundation. And just to think about, here we are in these bodies. Why wouldn't we learn the names for our body parts? In the same way kids around 2, 3, 4 are learning about everything else in the world. They're learning that, okay, those are trucks and that's a tree and that's the sun. Yes. And this is your vulva. It's part of all of it. So a couple things there. Number one, that this is a series of ongoing conversations that, especially if you start with the anatomy, can be normalized, where there's just a free flow back and forth between you and your kids. And then number two, that you get to do it in bite-sized chunks and starting with the foundation of anatomy. Now, I'll also add that sometimes parents would say, oh my gosh, but my kid's already 10 or 12. I messed up. I didn't introduce this early enough. And what I would say is it's never too early, but it's also never too late. And even if by that age, they've already had kind of some of our messages from our culture, and they're already like giggling or somehow resisting the conversation, there's still value in establishing yourself as the trusted adult that they can come to. Because the reality is kids are going to seek out this information somewhere. Mm-hmm. And if we don't put ourselves out there as, hey, you can talk to me, or I'm open to having these conversations, then, other things fill in the gaps. And the number one thing that fills in the gap is internet porn. Mm-hmm. And I don't like getting into debates about, this isn't about like I don't get into the porn debate largely, but it's more, I think that everyone can agree that porn is not the ideal sex education for our kids. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And average rate of first exposure is around 11. So, it's like, okay, guys, let's, or not guys, okay, ladies and gentlemen and everyone else. Okay, parents, let's start addressing this.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to take a quick break. I don't know about you, but it is warming up here, which means that we are packing up the winter clothes, bringing out the spring clothes. And I realize I don't have that much spring stuff for Jovi. And I have told you guys on here before how much I love Stitch Fix, but now they offer the kids program too. So Stitch Fix Kids is the effortless way to get clothes that fit your kid and your price range. Items start at just $10. You can go online, fill out what kind of style you want or that your kid wants to wear, and they will put together a box and ship it to you. And then you only pay for what you keep. You ship back the rest, and then you can continue to do this monthly as the seasons change. You can have a subscription or just do a one-time thing. But anywhere from toddlers to picky tweens, Stitch Fix Kids has growth spurts taken care of for you between sizes 2T and 18 years old. And Jovi's actually in a 2T now. She's 18 months, but she's wearing 2T. And so we ordered the Stitch Fix, and we ended up keeping everything in it because it was so cute. And like I said, we need spring clothes here now. And she actually loved going through it. There was the cutest spring sweater, cardigan, jeans, a couple of dresses. And I'm really glad that this was something that we decided to do. And I know that we're going to be ordering another one as it gets even hotter out. And it's just like such an easy way to avoid, for me, I don't like going to malls, trying on different things. So Stitch Fix Kids is perfect for me. So try today at stitchfix.com/mamas and you'll get 25% off when you keep everything in your kids' fix. That's stitchfix.com/mamas for 25% off when you keep everything in your kids' fix. stitchfix.com/mamas.
You make such a good point, though, that, people who might think that I don't want to start this conversation young, or I kind of have a different mentality, but like you made such a good point of just, it's not this like big talk when they're 2 years old. It's just starting with the body parts and having things normalized because it is normal. And then you being the source that they can come to, being a trusted source where, they're not ashamed to come tell you if something's wrong or off or something happened or they're, just different things. which is so important. I mean, I know that that's the type of relationship that I want with my kids, that they can come to me and talk about normal body functions that happen, or, if something feels off or whatever it is. Like, I would hope that my children would be able to come to me and tell me that.
Totally. And one other thing on this is a lot of it is oriented around your kids' development in terms of, different kids develop at different rates. So some kids are already masturbating at 3, and some kids don't for years and years after that. And I mean, oftentimes around 5 is normal. And so, like when you said a big thing for us is just taking shame out of the conversation. So it's like, okay, if you notice that your kid is masturbating in the living room or something, that's an opportunity to have a conversation about bodies, and like, wow, it feels good to touch your body, huh? And you want to do that in the privacy of your own room, and your body belongs to you. This is where consent starts coming in. It's like, it's perfectly okay for you to touch your body, but only you get to touch your body. Your body belongs to you, but for some kids, that might not be a relevant conversation that young. So you kind of need to track what you notice is going on for your kid and use that as natural doorways to initiate some of these conversations. And then if that's established, then also kids can come to you, as you're saying, with questions. And another piece is, say you're introducing something to them. If a kid is curious, children are naturally curious. They'll ask questions. And so you don't have to have it all premeditated on, this is the agenda of what you want to get through. You can start small. And then if they're curious and ask questions, you can answer more. And it's also okay to say, I need to think about that, or I actually don't know, and then go off and do your own research and come back to them. So taking the pressure off of, you have to have it all figured out and you have to know the answers to everything. That's a big piece. And in terms of making it easier, that's also why we have a 10-book series, and it's ranked for different ages, even though every kid is different. So you have to really monitor to your child. But we go through a whole range of subject matter. And I think it's really helpful, can be really helpful, to have accompanying books so that you can read through the books together, or, have your kid go off and read a book and come back to you with questions. And, I think that is a big tool that most parents don't have.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to touch on, because you were saying like some kids might realize like, oh, it feels good when I touch myself, like at a super young age. And I think that that's also something that's kind of viewed as taboo, and like that your kid kind of like, oh, does my kid like want to, like, what are they, like, what's going through their mind? What are they, whatever, instead of kind of this, they're learning to explore their body and they're just realizing something feels good. I'd love for you to kind of touch on that. Cause I mean, I know for me, like I did not know that females masturbated until I was a senior in high school. And I was talking with other girls and they were like, what, you've never masturbated before? And I'm like, I didn't know that women could. Like, I thought that just guys did it. Like, I had no idea that that was even a thing for the female anatomy. No idea.
Yes. And yeah. And I mean, there's women who are far, far older than that who still don't know, or for whatever reason, there's shame, or, just don't go there. And yeah, I think that breaking down the taboo around female masturbation specifically is so important, especially circling back around to the having a voice, being your own advocate, feeling empowered in your own body. Mm-hmm. So there's the language, That's so key. But then there's also just, hey, I know what does and doesn't feel good in my own body because I've already explored my own body. So there's more likelihood of, just being able to guide a partner or let them know what does and doesn't feel good if you have that baseline or experience with yourself. In terms of, I think also a really important piece is that when kids are exploring their body, it's exactly that, what you said. They're just discovering, wow, this feels good. It's not even sexual in terms of how adults think of sexual. Right. Mm-hmm. So most of us, even if we don't want it to be this way, what we think sex and sexuality is, it's so hyper sexualized or based on the media or porn or whatever. Like we have this certain bias of wow. And I think this is part of what prevents us from having more conversations is, it's this whole, there's all these unquestioned assumptions and images of what sex and sexuality is and means. And so I invite us as best as possible to put that aside for a moment and just open up, come back to, I would say, just a more natural or basic, what is being in a body really all about, especially if you think of being a kid. They haven't been exposed to all that. They're not all enculturated and programmed by the media. So for them, it's as simple as, wow, I have this body. How incredible is it to be in this body? Oh, I discovered that when I bang my knee, that hurts. And, when I'm tickled, that feels tickly. And perhaps when I touch my genitals, that feels good. And it's that simple. It's not tied to romantic love. It's not tied to anything pornographic. It's just, there's a real, I've heard this term, erotic innocence. Mm-hmm. And we could even take erotic out of it. It's just feels good. And it's completely innocent and natural and normal. Mm-hmm. So I find that can be helpful just to realize that all the resistance or shame or story, that's what we're carrying as adults. Kids don't have that. So the best of our ability to not layer that onto their experience, the better.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
All right. Do you feel like you put off like fun until you've earned it? I know that I feel that way sometimes, but also as a mom, I feel like I do so much every single day already that I need a little bit of time to sit down, relax, and do whatever I want. And that's when I like to play Best Fiends. It is an exciting puzzle adventure game that you can have fiendish fun with anywhere, anytime. Lately, I've been playing it while I am nursing in the middle of the night because it helps keep me up. It gives me a little brain stimulation. I can have fun and beat some levels while I'm doing it. I have lately been doing the special missions. So not necessarily conquering the levels, but doing special missions because they are very challenging. I usually run out of life until like trying to beat one level. So they're very challenging. They keep me engaged and I really love doing it. Right now I'm doing Howie's Quest. So you earn different characters and then you can go on special missions for these characters. And that is what I have been doing. And Best Fiends is a free to download mobile puzzle game with thousands of exciting levels for new adventures and challenges every time you play. There are dozens of unique fiends to collect, so you can customize your team of fiends to defeat the menacing slugs. And you don't have to be online to play. You can have no internet, no data, no Wi-Fi, and still be able to play. You can put your phone on airplane mode, go on an airplane, and play Best Fiends. That's also why I love it. So you have earned your fun time. Go to the App Store and Google Play to download Best Fiends for free. Plus, you can earn even more with $5 worth of in-game rewards when you reach level 5. That's friends without the R, Best Fiends.
I feel like I could see how, like, let's say you have a 4-year-old and they're just kind of like playing with themselves. And if you're like, oh, hey, don't do that. Like, they immediately think like they're doing something wrong. And I just know like the way that I kind of grew up, I just carried so much shame in my body, and you don't want your kids to feel ashamed for exploring what's natural. And like you said, it's not like they're having these sexual thoughts. It's literally exploring your anatomy that you were born with, that you were given. And I know for me, it's really important. Like, I don't want my kids to feel shame in their body, because that was like a huge part of like my story and my background. And so then if you're like, hey, stop touching, you know what I mean? But and also like when it comes to little girls, like it's so normal. It's like, oh, boys always play with their penises. Like they're just little boys, and it's normalized. But for girls, it's not.
Totally.
Like boys will be boys, his hands down his pants, whatever. Yep.
100%. Yeah. There's a lot of unwinding to do here. And that's why with our books, we have one focused on female anatomy, one focused on male anatomy. And then we have one book, it's called What's the M Word? So it's focused on masturbation, but it's actually geared towards people with vulvas. It's geared towards girls, because to your point, we're like, okay, it's already more broadly accepted that boys will touch themselves, you can be proud of your penis. Stand there. It's a rocket. It's, it's this amazing thing. And that's even why our superhero is a vulva superhero. And I mean, we live in such a phallic culture in many ways that we're like, okay, let's in our own way try to balance that a bit and bring the vulva out of the shadows and normalize it and bring it out. And the superhero not only for girls, but also for boys, because many boys will grow up to interact with vulvas at some point. And so we would love them to have My Little Yoni be their first encounter with that symbol, as opposed to, for example, porn, So it's like, there's a lot to counterbalance here. But that's some of what we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. And one other thing that you touched on. So yes, absolutely. That whole, hey, don't do that. So a really helpful thing is just to almost, I don't want to say rehearse, but just mentally prepare for moments like that. And then just take a breath, take a breath, recenter yourself before. Do you even need to, can you just let them do what they're doing and then talk to them later, not even interrupt what they're doing. So yes, we don't want there to be shame. And then we also want to make sure though, that they stay safe. So that's why, that's why I think it's great to say, hey, it's totally natural, normal to want to touch yourself, but private space, safe space, your bedroom, your body belongs to you. Like, it is very important to start bringing in those early foundational consent conversations in terms of establishing that their body is theirs. Because, we don't want them masturbating on the playground. Right. There are places to do that and not do that. And that's also okay. Like learning boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Right. Or even being like, hey, that's okay, but this isn't the place for it type of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like it is hard. I feel like even like having this conversation, like, I don't know why I feel like there's so much resistance to people of like trying to have these conversations and like not really understanding the benefits of starting the conversation young and not being like, hey, like you can't do that, like type thing. I mean, I feel like it's okay to be like, hey, it's not socially acceptable to explore your body in public places. But you know what I mean? Like, it's hard, I think, for some people. Maybe I'm just because of where and how I grew up, to like picture themselves having these conversations or even like accepting that these things are natural and not not them like already like being wrong, you know?
Yeah. And that's where, not everyone is going to step in, but you'd be surprised. I mean, I've talked to parents from all different backgrounds, including oftentimes I'm surprised by the Christian moms I talk to. We have a lot of Christian moms who love My Little Yoni. Mm-hmm. And you would kind of, I don't like generalizing, but I'll just admit it for myself. I kind of assumed like that would not be our market, right? But it turns out that, it's like it doesn't really matter what your background is. If you've experienced the pain of confusion or not being able to advocate for yourself or being disconnected or cut off or ashamed in your body or, as so many of us as parents have, mm-hmm. then that's motivating. Even if it's uncomfortable, even if there's resistance, the desire for our kids to be more empowered, healthier in themselves and their relationships, that's motivating enough to try things differently. So that's what I usually encounter. And that's encouraging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd love for you to tell us like a little bit about your books. Cause you said, there's a range of topics and you can buy the bundle so you can get all of them and then just kind of use them as they grow. But there's some that kind of you would do younger. Like, is there an order to them?
Yeah, there is. So we have, it's all the Yoni magic series. And I didn't mention why Yoni. So our character is named Yoni. We're My Little Yoni. And Yoni is actually a Sanskrit word for vulva that means sacred gateway. And so even though in the books, when we're going over anatomy, we're talking about vulva and labia and like getting into the accurate anatomical terms, Yoni is a real word. And we use it because we think that's a profound meaning, sacred gateway. And as a doula, I mean, you know all about the sacred gateway. Mm-hmm. And so just the idea of language being powerful, we love that meaning. It's also a really fun word. And so that's why we use the word Yoni. And little, by the way, vagina means sheath for a sword.
Oh.
So
I feel like even the meaning of it, it's like it's not yours. This is for a penis to go into.
Right. Yeah. Yes. So we really like the meaning of Yoni. So we love the idea of that word becoming a household word. But our series, it's the Yoni Magic series, and there's 10 books in the series. And the first one's The Amazing Truth. That's all focused on vulva anatomy. And then there's The Spectacular Truth, and that's focused on male anatomy. And then we have All About Consent, which that's pretty self-explanatory. Oh, and ages, the first two, the ones that are focused on anatomy are ages 3 to 5 plus. And then we have What's the M Word? All About Consent, that's 5 to 8 plus. And we put a range because, again, we leave it to parents. You know your kids the best. Mm-hmm. So we always encourage parents to look at it and see what you're comfortable with. And then our next book is Creating Life, which is all about, that's one of kids' favorite questions is, how did I get here? How are babies made or whatever? And it's really wonderful to be able to bring them while they're still curious, because that window of super curiosity when it comes to things like that doesn't last forever. Mm-hmm. So it's really nice to address it while they're still really curious to know about it. And then we have one book focused on LGBTQ. And then we have another book that's called Loving LGBTQ. And we have another book focused on gender identity, because that's a really, important thing to understand. And that's like in the 8 to 10 range. And then we have Beyond the Birds and the Bees, and that's going beyond how babies are made and more getting into partner sex. And that's recommended 8 to 10 plus. And then the last two books we have The Power of Periods, which is also 8 to 10 plus. And that's one of my favorite books, just because that's another thing. We talked about the taboo of masturbation, but and this is getting better, but there's still, it's surprising how much we often don't know about our periods before getting them. And that book's also for boys. I mean, there's no reason for boys to not know that periods exist.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned.
Right. An uncomfortable subject with them.
Yeah. And then the last book, which we don't put this in order because it's kind of stands on its own. It's called A New Baby is Coming. And that gets more, this would be great for you actually. This gets more into just pregnancy. Mm-hmm. What is pregnancy? What is your pregnant parent going through during pregnancy? And then also preparing to become an older sibling.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I know. I feel like it's definitely hard to describe. We're like, baby? Yeah, there's a baby in there. Baby. And then she points to her belly and she's like, baby? We're like, no, there's not one in here.
Nope.
Not quite. Yeah.
Not quite.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. And again, I feel like it is an important conversation. I feel like with most things, it should begin in the home, and then it kind of spreads outward. I don't want to entrust somebody else to teach my kids about sex, whether it's the government or their friends or, any of that. Like, I would rather be the source of that.
100%. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I know I learned a lot from my friends.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
I didn't even know where the vagina was until I got my period and I had to learn to put in a tampon. I didn't know that there was a hole there.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was more of like the hot dog in a bun type of situation. Like I had no idea. I'm like, oh, wait, there's a hole that this goes into? I had zero idea about my anatomy. Yeah. None. So, and again, there's nothing shameful about the anatomy that you were born with.
No, not at all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not at all.
So I would love, before we wrap up, for you to just kind of tell people where they can find your books, where they can connect with you. I know you also have an Instagram, and you also have some really great blogs on your website. So where can people find all of that?
Yes, our website is mylittleyoni.com. That's YONI. And then same thing, all our handles, Instagram, it's at mylittleyoni. And we do post a lot of educational content there. And then the book series, it's pretty cool when every time we sell a bundle, we then donate a book to an at-risk family. And then we operate as a nonprofit. So it might be you don't even have a kid, but you understand how important this is. So you might want to make a donation. And if you do, we get books out to at-risk families across the country. And a lot of people don't know this, that there's book deserts where there might only be one new children's book for every 300 residents, or 300 households rather. And so it's like, wow, it's fantastic. If you can buy the books, absolutely buy them for yourself, for your friends, for your family, for your nieces and nephew. But then also, I'm really passionate about getting this information out as widely and freely as possible to people who can't afford it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yes, My Little Yoni.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love that. I love the Yoniverse that's on there. I actually heard the word Yoni when I was traveling, and I met this lady, and she, I cannot remember the name of it now, but she used to make like crystals that were like dildo type things. And it was, or like the Yoni eggs. And that was like the first time I think I ever heard the word Yoni.
Yeah.
It's a good term.
It's a good
It's
term.
better than vagina. Now I'm kind of pissed about the name vagina. I'm like, this is more than just a, sleeve for a sword.
100%.
I'm about to birth a baby out of it. Like,
yes.
no. Man, for sure.
Good. We
a guy
have one
named
more
that.
convert to Yoni. We like it.
For sure. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much for coming on and for having this conversation. Again, like I know it makes some people super uncomfortable, but I feel like all of these subjects are really important to talk about. And I think everybody listening could agree that they would rather their children learn about sex from them, learn about their body parts from them versus friends, porn, school, whatever else is out there that's teaching them. So it's important to have these conversations. So I'll have all of the links in the show notes to your website, to your Instagram, so people can follow along. And I just want to thank you for your time and energy and expertise here today.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for hosting the conversation. And yeah, great being here.
She was so much fun to talk to. I definitely learned a lot. I feel like there's maybe still some spaces in me that are like a little uncomfortable with some stuff, but I feel like that's just where we have to learn and grow and normalize a lot of things that are completely normal and not weird or bad or shameful. So that would be, I guess, like one of my goals, like I was saying at the beginning, just with my kids, is that they don't feel ashamed of their bodies, or it's not weird to say vulva, like that's my vulva. That's the name of that body part. I don't understand why it's uncomfortable or weird. Oh, there's Tula saying hi. So yeah, I just really enjoyed talking to Ariel. You can get her book. You can check out the different products that she has. And I'll link in the show notes her essential sex guide, so you can find all the different books that we had talked about and everything that she has to offer. All right. I love you guys, and we will talk to you next week. Bye.
If you want to be the most interesting person at the cocktail party, well, hop on over and listen to the Brain Candy podcast.
Our award-winning content will have you laughing while you're learning.
We read all the best articles, books, and studies and keep up with new TV shows, documentaries, and pop culture. And then we cram it all into 2 shows a week.
Conspiracy theories, cannibal rabbits, unsolved mysteries, the history of the Walkman. There's something for everyone.
The Brain Candy podcast. Find our link in the show notes.
Or simply search for the Brain Candy podcast on your podcast app.